Welcome to Zero Trust Journey, where Zero Trust practitioners and leaders share unfiltered stories, leaving the marketing fluff behind. This is not another vendor pitch. It's a nonprofit community project founded for the people navigating the real Zero Trust journey. The views expressed are personal opinions and do not represent any organization. This content is for educational use only.
Welcome, everyone, to another session of Zero Trust Journey, where we talk about Zero Trust unfiltered. We also talk about where Zero Trust doesn't make sense. So this is not a sponsored or marketing event. This is where we just get to hear from industry leaders and subject matter experts. Speaking of, today we have George Finney with us. George is CISO at University of Texas System with a law degree background. George, I want to talk about that. How did that infuse between law and cybersecurity? He has been in cybersecurity the past 2 decades. He is a best-selling author of Project Zero Trust book. I don't know if you have it handy. You want to show it to our audience, a story about a strategy for aligning security. He is also author of other books as well. George, welcome to the show. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's just a pleasure to talk to you today.
George, I'm going to pick your famous quote. Don't make your organization an M&M. Make it a jawbreaker, hard all the way through so the bad guys break their teeth trying to bite in. I would like to hear from your side how microsegmentation, least privilege, and removing trust really works. And what do you mean by that? Don't make it M&M and make it jawbreaker.
You know, I love M&Ms. I've got nothing against M&Ms. They're soft on the inside and they've got the crunchy candy shell. So you know that's a great analogy for someone non-technical to help them kind of understand.
Sure.
What Zero Trust is, right? Everybody, has eaten an M&M at some point in their lives, I assume, unless you're allergic to chocolate or whatever. But right, that's the way perimeter defense used to work, right? Hard, perimeter, but then everything on the inside can talk to everything else. I love the idea of making a Zero Trust network like a jawbreaker, right? And I think we can viscerally relate to that, and even for technical folks. And I think this is where Zero Trust helps out the most. If the security nerds in the room are the only ones that understand Zero Trust, you're going to have a lot of challenges because we need to collaborate with our IT friends, right? A lot of the work that ultimately needs to get done with Zero Trust, IT has to be on the same page with us. And I think Zero Trust being a strategy helps get all of us moving in the same direction. So something just as simple as like a candy metaphor can really help bring along your CIO or your server admins or architects or other folks to think, okay, now I get it, right? I had that same experience really early on in my career where like you finally see the big picture, and so many of us in all of IT are so specialized now. We focus on one tool or whatever. Again, getting that idea like, okay, let's make the whole thing a jawbreaker. It really does, I think, help people get the big picture.
100%. Since you brought up the topic of where we all need to work together, and you mentioned that this is not just the tech side of it. So why failed Zero Trust projects or programs or initiatives often were buried by culture rather than the tech? So we hear that my Zero Trust implementation of the project was not successful, even though the tech guys were all excited. We had the right innovation tech and all that. It just never took off. The cultural shift was just too big of an ask from an organization.
Well, there's a great quote from a management consultant. His name is Peter Drucker. And what he said is culture eats strategy for breakfast. So Zero Trust is a strategy. We can talk more about why that's the case in a minute. But if Zero Trust is a strategy, my gosh, like, again, this kind of dawned on me as a leader. Like, I've got a great strategy. I'm working on cool things. This is the right direction to move through. But if I'm not bringing the team along with me, the struggle that a lot of any leaders in any industry face is, if you don't understand and have empathy for what your teams are doing, whether they're network or cloud or anywhere in between, you've got to understand their day to day. Everybody wants to be secure. Nobody starts out, their morning thinking, I'm gonna implement this IT stuff and make it totally insecure. I'm gonna vibe code this new app and make it. They're not thinking that way. They're thinking about deadlines. They're thinking about how to get stuff done and have time left for their family at the end of the day. You've got to capture that culture and find a way to make yourself a part of it. One of the things I did at SMU several years ago, we had a mascot. We're a university. So everything in my security program became Mustang centric, and people really loved it, right? We made calendars for people. We made posters with horses on them. People love looking at horses. So you've got to find a way to nudge or shift your culture to be in alignment with that strategy of zero trust. However, those are the soft skills parts of the question, and in some ways that's almost harder than the technical side of it.
Yeah, so for our audience, a lot of people are still trying to understand what zero trust is, but it's different than any like the security principles we used to have, least privilege or trust but verify. So, George, I'm sure you hear these questions and I should say, quote, air quotes, objections that what is new in zero trust? Like, why do we have to continue talking about zero trust? Why can't we just execute the principles that we discussed, let's say 3 decades ago, like least privilege or trust but verify, or I want to make sure that I have business alignment. Like those were the principles already. What's new in zero trust?
Yeah, I had this really eye-opening conversation a little over a year ago with the CISO for a top 5 bank in the world. And what they asked me was, they had a meeting with their leadership, and they're like, well, zero trust, like, isn't that like a couple years old now? Like, what's the new thing? Oh, zero trust is just a fad. And I mean, it's an interesting idea, right? I think all of security and technology, we're addicted, I think, in a way, to the latest trend. We're always following the new things and new tech. Zero trust is not a fad; it's a strategy, right? So let's stop here for a second. The definition of zero trust. You might have heard marketing, folks use it however they use it, but the definition of the creator of zero trust used and that we reflect in my books. Zero trust is a strategy for preventing or containing breaches by removing the trust relationships we have in digital systems. So very simple, one sentence. Very easy to understand your elevator pitch. It's a strategy. And whatever new thing comes along, whatever new tech that we end up having to secure or chase or whatever, AI, what have you, cool, my strategy stays the same, right? The conditions on the field are still all about trust and bad guys exploiting trust relationships, even in AI or even in some of the newer tech that's out. That is the focus of zero trust. And I don't have to change my strategy every 6 months when a new marketing buzzword comes out. That to me is actually comforting as a security leader, because I can continue on the same direction, chart the same course without having to shift gears all the time, which frankly is exhausting.
Yeah, that's totally valid. But for someone who is adopting or have adopted zero trust, so George, how do you know if your zero trust implementation is working? Do you continue considering zero trust maturity model or zero trust maturity model plus plus? What metrics or signals matter the most? Visibility, segmentation, policy coverage? Like what as a CISO, what would you consider if you were to actually evaluate your zero trust implementation?
I mean, it's really all of the above. I mean, you want as many signals as you can. I mean, one of the things that I think focusing on the pillars of zero trust helps with is just to make sure you're eliminating your blind spots. So that's one important thing. So if you're getting information from your SOC or your MSSP, or you're doing a GRC assessment and you're missing something, I love that you bring up the zero trust maturity model that CISA came up with in partnership with the Cloud Security Alliance and some of their supporting members. That's a great way to test your level of zero trust. And again, it's going to evolve over time. Changes happen in your environment, but I think you always have to maintain a good network of signals to know, hey, oh my gosh, we saw this thing come through. The implication of that is that, well, we didn't have a control on X service, or we oops didn't deploy MFA to something, or hey, there's a whole new category of stuff like API security that we hadn't thought about. We're just watching the news. Maybe it's not even about my network, but I'm reading an article about how someone's data was completely exfiltrated through an API because they didn't have API security. They weren't doing checks. They didn't have an API firewall or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. that's a great thing for me to come back and say, do we have a blind spot here? And I think we've always got to be on our toes and be able to understand comprehensively what's going on in our networks, right? Which is hard to do. And, I think in security, we're rising to the challenge of trying to get on the cutting edge. But frankly, we're so siloed, we're so specialized, right? Security might be the only group that has complete visibility to all of the parts of IT, whereas IT is generally pretty siloed.
Totally makes sense. But again, George, how is that different than our security job day to day? Like, what does zero trust brings differently for evaluating your security program? So you would, if you were using NIST CSF, you would use that to evaluate where you are today. How does zero trust actually makes it different that I have to think about differently? You said strategy, but also security leaders had strategy before zero trust, let's say. So what does zero trust brings it differently?
Well, so I think that's a great distinction to call out, right? We've had concepts in security for a long time. So think about defense in depth.
Yes.
Defense in depth is not a strategy. It's a concept, it's a practice, but does it actually meet the definition of a strategy, right? I know that layers of my security stack are going to fail at certain points, and defense in depth tells us you need more layers. Cool. It's not there's no end goal to that, right? There's no common denominator. It's not asking why the layers are failing. For example, zero trust says, okay, well, we're looking to the why. Why did that layer fail?
Sure.
It's trust. How do we pull out those trusts in a way that doesn't impact the organization or productivity or usability? So, I think focusing on that strategic approach, I would actually argue that maybe we don't have other strategies when it comes to security. Right. So, cool. Maybe your compliance is your strategy. I mean, okay, if your goal is just to be minimally compliant, well, that's the goal. You can have a strategy to check boxes. Cool. That didn't prevent a breach. First of all, I love frameworks out there, but again, going back to, I think a framework is a good way to, understand whether you've got a complete program, because you have to have all the things. Cool, you've got all the things, but did you also harden your systems, right? That those kinds of steps aren't necessarily specified in every compliance framework, right? Cool, you're required to do a pen test on some sort of regular basis. Did you do anything with the results? Did you harden your systems? Did you close the gaps? What's your SLA for doing that? Again, I think zero trust forces us, to answer your question, in our day to day. It keeps us connected to the big picture and helps us make sure that we're closing our gaps in a prioritized, appropriate way.
Right. George, in your experience, have you seen someone gone through the journey and executed zero trust, implemented the architecture? And again, this is not a summit as we discussed here, that is a strategy that they considered that they had done everything in their power to make this a Jawbreaker network. And now it's a zero trust. Is there a point when zero trust should be just the norm, not a project, if you will? Like, when should an organization stop calling it a zero trust project and call it just like, I have security? Or what should they be doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, right, we know our attackers are always evolving. There's new techniques to exploit our organizations. We know our organizations are always growing and changing and evolving. Sometimes we're acquiring companies. Sometimes we're adopting new technologies or shifting. So I think, your initial journey into zero trust, getting the basics done, might take a couple of years.
Sure.
An identity project or a microsegmentation project, those are sometimes pretty big lifts, especially for folks who have a lot of legacy technology. I would say your strategy should be a way of life, right? So maybe you get over that initial project. Nobody's starting at zero. Everybody is some ways along your zero trust journey already. You're doing some of those things, and it's really about incorporating that. And I think once you complete your initial project, I think when you're there, when you've made it sustainable. Right, when your IT teams are already baking that in, when your dev teams have integrated security into their workflows and they believe in it, that I think is where, you're on a sustaining maintenance journey now. You're not necessarily having to do a lot of heavy lifting. Just like if you were to start working out, you can meet your goals. You might have to work out more at first, but then you're more on a maintenance routine after that to keep the muscle mass you've created. Right, that's the idea.
George, let's double click on that part where nobody starts at zero. So if let's say a company is starting their journey, or let's say a new company is founding their IT or security infrastructure, would zero trust make sense for them to start as a strategy, or should they start with something differently and then come to the zero trust to mature their security strategy? Or have you seen any implementations who are new companies starting their security and they would consider zero trust?
I think that's a wonderful question, particularly for startups. I love this question because probably with a startup, your security team is not your first hire. You're hiring marketing folks.
Right. Sales,
You've got to
accounting.
build out your product. So necessarily, you might not hire a dedicated security person until you're 20, 30, 50 people into your startup, right? Maybe you're in the B or C rounds at that point, and that's okay. But I think my hope is that when you got that tech person that's building out your product, you've got a CTO. Hopefully, they know enough about zero trust to start from the beginning, right? Because it's going to be so much harder to reverse engineer security later on. And I do applaud folks for baking security in from the beginning. But gosh, what was it this last week? We heard somebody vibe coded a dating app, and I think that the company name was like tea or something.
Sure.
Like they're spilling the tea. But all of the photos, the profiles, and everything were just publicly posted. There was no security built in, and that's maybe that's the exception that proves a rule, like where they just didn't. Maybe they were starting at zero in terms of zero, security.
Right.
We need to be thinking about that, all of us, right? There's an old term from the military: security is everybody's job, right? And fundamentally, if you build if you take the trouble of building a company and getting funding, and then lose everything because you didn't think about security, right? That's a tragedy.
Yeah.
And I think we all can do better, and
100%.
inspired to do that.
100%. Yeah. As we are starting to wrap this episode, I want to ask you that one question that you often bring up: this protect surface over the attack surface. What's a subtle shift, and why does it matter?
So there's a whole product category that a product category company that helps people market products created, called attack surface management. So the theory is that if somehow you can reduce your attack surface, the net of that is you'll be more secure. Kind of like if we shrink our carbon footprint, somehow we'll be more secure, or whatever. I think that is. I mean, maybe calling it a lie is an outright, is a little strong. But you don't control your attack surface ever, right? I'm thinking back to the Peloton breach several years ago. They had an API that was exposed in their mobile app. Every device in the entire world, right, was their attack surface. You don't control that. What you do control as a blue teamer, as a defender, is your protect surface. You know what your crown jewels are. You know where your databases are. At least I hope you do. And so thinking about protect surface is what I can wrap my arms around. That helps us contain the blast radius of an incident. That helps us think and simplify our security controls so that we can make them more manageable. And frankly, more affordable from a cost perspective. We don't have to have the a billion licenses. We need to have the licenses we need just for the surfaces we're protecting. So I think it's a defender mindset, right? So much of security, that's red team, blue team thing. The red team folks have their perspective, but as blue teamers, we can't think about every device in the universe. We just have to think about what we can control, and hopefully get that right there.
Yeah, and listeners out there, we cover this extensively in Cloud Security Alliance CCZT course, the protect surface over the attack surface. And I think, George, you were one of the contributors to that as well. So my producer will hate me if I don't bring up AI. So let's talk about, this is the last question. Where do you think Zero Trust will go next? Will AI and automation redefine what it means to be, air quotes?
So I'm so glad you brought up AI, because my new book, Rise of the Machines, that just came out this summer. It is how to apply zero trust principles to artificial intelligence, and how to leverage AI to do zero trust.
All right.
And so, my last book, Project Zero Trust, was actually inducted into the Cybersecurity Hall of Fame back in May. And so
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm just blown away by the response. And I think people love it so much because it's a story. Right? They're characters.
Yeah. Project Phoenix. So people who have read that, a lot of that feeling you get there, like Dylan, the character, and the ransomware attack on the company. So for those who have not read it, pick up that book from George Finney, and you'll see it's a lot concept than the techie, but you'll understand really what it's talking about for zero trust.
Yeah. So the new one, Rise of the Machines, is a sequel. So all the same characters are back. It's the same company, same case study. And just like all the rest of us, they're having to figure out how to secure AI. Spoiler alert, it's still zero trust, right? Their strategy stays the same.
Okay.
But the technology, right, is interesting. You do have to know how technology works in order to secure it, right? So we start out with a baseline, how AI works. There's a great analogy that I think anyone can relate to. So yeah, I think we're with AI. My hope is we're not there today. There's some great AI tools that help SOC analysts be more productive and work faster. I think it is possible in a future state, maybe 5 years from now, for AI to be more comprehensively protecting our entire organizations. Right? I think with AI, we have a much better ability to be able to understand all of the things that are happening within our organizations, workflows, identity. And I think it'll start to help us scale zero trust even more quickly. So instead of looking at a 2, 3, 5 year implementation timeline for some zero trust projects, I think that's where we will see the big difference with AI and zero trust, is being able to shrink that journey down into weeks or months instead of years. I threw some spoilers in there, but there's so much great stuff in the new book.
Well, look forward to it, George.
Yeah. So definitely go check it out.
Excellent, George. Thanks so much for coming on the show and talking to us, Zero Trust. Obviously, you are one of the OGs who have really helped evangelize Zero Trust, and some of the questions I fielded today, again, we got those as an objections where, hey, Zero Trust doesn't make sense, or how is it different? So again, thanks so much for giving your insights.
Thank you for having me.
That's a wrap on this Zero Trust journey. Now it's your turn. Step into the spotlight, share your story, and be part of the journey. Subscribe to Zero Trust Journey on LinkedIn for the latest news, events, and giveaways. Until next time.